Hi. If you're watching this, you are one of the great heroes of the Christian faith. You're a church treasurer, and we congratulate you on being asked to serve in this capacity, and thank you for taking the job. You know, at most Free Methodist churches, this is not a particularly complex task, but it's a critically important one, and it's one that is much less complex if you just know the unique rules of the road when it comes to church finance. That's the purpose of this webinar, to help you understand the basics of church finance. If you're an MBA or a CPA or an accountant, please forgive information that I'm sure seems extremely basic. So if you're any of those, just every now and again, roll your eyes, throw up your hands and say, I know all this stuff. And if I say something wrong, you get the joy of calling the chief operating officer of the denomination and telling him he's a doofus. But since churches have unique rules and benefits, it's possible that somewhere in here there might be one thing you may not have known. And that one thing is hopefully worth the 30 minutes that you'll spend watching this entire presentation. Now, you don't have to watch the whole thing, though, because this presentation is broken into chapters by topic. So you can either watch the whole thing, or you can take a break of, a month or year or something between the chapters, or you can skip to the topic that you really want to know about. We'll be talking about how to organize your church to incorporate or get started, how to pay pastors and compensate them, health insurance and liability insurance, issuing receipts to donors, buying, mortgaging, and selling property, and how finances work between the local church, the conference office, and the national denomination. Fun, huh? Well, this webinar is recorded in chapters, as I said, so watch the whole thrilling laugh-a-minute presentation, or let's just get ready to skip to one in which you really need specific information. There's a table of contents, by the way, on either the web page or on the DVD that hopefully got you to watching this in the first place. So let's get started. Chapter 1, Getting Organized and Started as a New Church. Your church may have been here for 100 years, in which case you probably don't need to know this. But if you're just planning a church, you should know that a church does not have to be incorporated. We strongly recommend it because it adds a great layer of protection for your pastor, your board, your assets, and, well, as treasurer, for yourself. But it's not a rule. So if you're not incorporated and you'd like to know how to do so, feel free to call my office. Our telephone number is 1-800-342-5531. Or email me at larry.roberts@fmcusa.org. We'll be happy to help. Or if you're not ready to become incorporated yet, you still need to have some rules, right, by which you're going to operate. Well, those can be listed in a document called Articles of Association, or just a simple letter of association. Contact us if you'd like more information, a template or something for one of these. And while you don't need to be incorporated, you do have to have an EIN, or an Employer Identification Number. Now, unless you're just starting, I'm sure you already have one of these. But if you are just starting your church, here's how you get one. Go to irs.gov. In the search box, type in EIN. You'll be taken to a page that lets you apply online. Just click on Begin Application and then fill out the amazingly short form, well, at least for the IRS. By the way, the first question could be tricky. Well, it is the IRS, for Pete's sake, in that it asks what type of legal structure you have. One option is corporation, so you think, well, duh, that's me, huh? But even if you're incorporated, don't check that one. Keep going down the list until it says View Additional Types, including Tax Exempt. There you are. Click on that one. You'll find another list. Go down that list until you find the word Church. Bingo. Use that one. An important warning, by the way. When you apply for your EIN, be sure to use the formal name of your church. That would be the name that you used when you incorporated it, for instance, if you did that, or the name that you expect to use when you will formally organize. And be careful to not file more than once with different names. We've had a number of churches that end up with 2 or 3 different EINs because they registered once as First Free Methodist Church of Billyville, and then later they registered as the Billyville Free Methodist Church. If there really is a town called Billyville, I apologize if this has made your life more difficult than it must already be. Free Methodist churches are tax exempt because they're listed on the IRS site under the tax exempt number of the denomination. So if you are starting a church, please call or email my office and tell us so we can inform the IRS. And if you're not certain that your church is listed, well, you can go to irs.gov, search for the EO Master List, and then click on the state you're in so that you can look by group number 1419. That's important, 1419. Under that group number, if your name is there, you're golden. If it's not, you're calling us. One other important thing, and this is important, do not use the denomination's EIN or any other church's EIN, not even your cousin's. We would never give out our EIN, but somehow a thief has come in the night and stolen and killed and destroyed, and well, some churches have gotten our EIN number and they've used it. I'll always remember the day from the man from the IRS showed up at my office here. Trust me, for everybody's sake, get your own EIN. And now, Chapter 2, Compensating and Reimbursing Pastors and Staff. Here's the first eccentricity of church finance. Pastors are to be treated as employees regarding compensation, but as self-employed as it regards Social Security and Medicare. That means that you pay a pastor like any other employee, taking out their federal income tax and any state or local withholding required. You send that into the Internal Revenue Service on a Form 941 according to those rules. Those rules, by the way, will list how often and when you need to send in the taxes based upon how much you owe. It could be quarterly or monthly or within 3 business days of the payroll date. The instructions are on the IRS website. Now listen, for our discussion, what matters is that you pay your pastor like any employee. You take out the taxes, you send them into the government, and you report their annual income on a W-2 form. But a pastor appointed to a church is not treated like an employee when it comes to Social Security. Instead, they're treated like a self-employed person. So, you do not deduct any FICA payments from their pay, and the church doesn't send in any matching payments. Now, you know, probably, maybe you don't, you're going to know now, normally employees have 7.65% of their pay deducted from their checks and sent to the Internal Revenue Service. And normally the employer also sends an additional 7.65% that is the matched employer's responsibility. So it totals 15.3%. So for a pastor, you don't do that. What you should do, however, is increase your pastor's salary by at least 7.65% to cover the employer's match for which the church would be responsible for any other employee. Many churches gross up the pastor's salary by the full 15.3% so that they're covering both the employees and the employer's portion of the tax that needs to be paid by the pastor. That amount is taxable, by the way, just like the rest of his or her salary. The reason for doing this is that your pastor will be responsible to pay herself or himself a self-employed SECA tax, which counts the same towards Social Security and Medicare, and he or she will owe the full 15.3%. So the church is paying the pastor what they would normally be sending to the Internal Revenue Service. Then be aware that pastors are required to fill out a W-4 form each year that tells you how much income tax they want withheld from their paychecks. Many pastors use that form to request an additional amount of taxes to be withheld from their pay, that amount equal to that 15.3%. So you see, when you do that, the employer is just sending in as federal withholding tax the same amount that would be owed by SECA, which is what they normally would have sent in as FICA tax. Now, of course, that's up to the pastor as to how they want to do that, but doing it this way saves them having to file quarterly estimated income tax payments themselves. All other employees of the church are paid and taxed in the normal way, same as others throughout America, with FICA or Social Security being deducted from their pay and submitted to the IRS with the employer's match on a Form 941. Now, having told you all of that, let me suggest that you don't do payroll yourself. There are a number of providers who do that, and they do it without your worrying about it. We recommend the one that we use at the World Ministries Center. You can find them at churchshield.com. Church Shield is one word, by the way. Now, here's why we recommend them. While most of the big payroll companies like ADP or Paychex, and they're fine, but they're going to charge you $40 to $50 probably per payroll, even if you only have 1 or 2 pastors. ChurchShield.com on the other hand, will charge you just $5 plus about $2.50 per employee. So if your church has 2 employees, it's $10 per payroll. So 40, 10. The 10 makes more sense, right? You can know when you do this that all of those tax issues are just going to be figured correctly. By the way, Church Shield, well, you can tell from their name, specializes in churches, so they will understand this whole SECA thing. Now, the 941s and the tax payments are correctly reported and paid when you use somebody like this. The W-2s are correctly filled out, and there are just a lot more benefits to it. One of the biggest risks for a local church is to incorrectly handle personnel matters, and this will mitigate that risk. ChurchShield.com also has built a system exclusively for Free Methodist churches, and that system will let you input each month or whenever you make the payroll some of the statistics that you'll need to report to us each year in our annual report. Things like attendance, the number of people who give their hearts to Jesus, the people who got baptized, etc. So you can just punch in the numbers when you send in the payroll, and all that data is neatly stored right there, so you don't have to spend your time searching all over the place for it once a year at the end of the year when we ask for your annual report. So email them at churchshield.com. Again, that's one word, churchshield.com, or you can call them at 317-570-9573. Now we move to probably the most entertaining thing you're going to hear, and that's the housing allowance. Another unique element of paying a pastor is the housing allowance. This allows an ordained or a licensed pastor who is appointed to a church to be reimbursed for all the costs associated with his or her housing and in tax-free dollars. These expenses include things like a mortgage payment, rent, real estate taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs, maintenance, homeowners' dues, and really all that stuff. Now, as treasurer, that means that if your pastor is paid, let's say $50,000 a year, and his or her housing expenses are $20,000 a year, well, for federal income tax purposes, you'd only show a salary of $30,000 a year. Think of the savings in taxes that they will enjoy. You would base your income taxes then on that $30,000 amount. Most payroll programs include a field called pre-tax or something like that. The pastor's housing allowance would be listed on that line. The total housing allowance paid in a year would be listed in box number 14 of the pastor's W-2 form. It is not taxable for income tax, but isn't there always a hook somewhere? The IRS requires that the housing allowance be no more than the fair market value for a residence of the type that your pastor has. We have a simple form that your pastor can fill out each year to determine what this is. It shows what is allowable and what isn't. It's available online at the Free Methodist website for its churches, FM Connect. If you need help in getting set up with access to the many tools that are available on FM Connect, just send us an email. Write support@fmcusa.org. And just in your email say, hey, I want to get on FM Connect to see some of that great information Larry was talking about. Somebody will get back to you, but nothing is simple, right? That housing allowance, back to the form now, not just how you get more information on it. The housing allowance is subject to SECA tax, the self-employed version of Social Security. So you would need to include the housing allowance in computing that extra 7.65% or the 15.3% in total that you add to your pastor's salary to cover what would be called FICA if he or she weren't a pastor. To qualify as non-taxable income, the housing allowance must be, and this is important, some churches forget this, it must be approved in advance by your church board and specifically referenced with the amount listed in your board minutes. So every November or December, remind your pastor to submit to the church board the amount claimed as housing for the next year and remind the board that they need to officially approve it. We have a simple form your pastor can fill out that shows what's allowed. Again, you can download that from our Free Methodist website for churches on FM Connect. And again, if you need more information on that, call the World Ministry Center, ask for the Communications Department, or email support@fmcusa.org. And please, remind your pastor that she or he is responsible to keep all records throughout the year of any expenses that would apply against the housing allowance. In my earlier example, If a pastor says that there's going to be $20,000 in housing expenses that year, well, by the end of the year, he or she needs to actually have $20,000 in proven payments toward those. If not, she or he needs to declare the difference as taxable income. Okay, let's move on now and talk about pension. You know, fewer than 1 in 5 people in the United States today have an actual pension program offered by their employer. I'm pleased to say that a significant benefit of being a Free Methodist church is a tremendous pension program that covers our pastors. Most appointed, ordained, or licensed pastors or conference ministerial candidates who are the senior pastor of a local church are enrolled in our defined benefit pension program. The church is required to pay those costs. They are 10.5% of your pastor's salary. That includes the housing allowance. Payments are made directly from the church to the pension plan via automatic withdrawals. Your church will receive an invoice each month before the funds are withdrawn from your bank account. And if your church gets a new pastor, be sure to get those forms from our pension department and fill them out so that your pastor is getting the credit that he or she deserves. If your pastor gets a raise, which we hope happens a lot, by the way, be sure to go online to fmcusa.org/HR/pension and then click on the Change of Status form from our pension department. Now we're moving on to something incredibly professional. It's called professional expenses. You know, and this is really true. It's expensive to be a good pastor. To do the job right, you need to meet with lots of people, meet them over lunch, meet them over coffee, invite them to your home. On the kind of salary that most pastors make, it is just not possible to pay for all those lunches and coffees and dinners, or for that matter, to pay for the gas to make all those hospital visits. So we strongly encourage your church to provide an expense account for your pastor so that these important parts of ministry can be carried out. Now, here's the treasurer part of this. Your board needs to approve an expense reimbursement policy, regardless of how rudimentary it is. The policy needs to just specify that your pastor's expenses are paid apart from their salary. Always pay these with a separate check after they turn in their receipts, by the way, so that there's no question but what they are, a reimbursement, not salary. And those receipts are an IRS requirement. So no receipt or no specified mileage, no reimbursement. Okay? Moving along, SUTA, or state unemployment tax, and workman's compensation. One other unique element of church payroll is that churches generally do not carry unemployment insurance. Now, while you have the right to apply for it, legal counsel tells us that once a church applies for this, it opens up a floodgate of other issues from which a church would normally be exempted. So while this is a sad thing for an employee who's terminated, the norm is to not report or pay either federal or state unemployment taxes. It's wise and just ethically the right thing to do to inform your new employees that your church doesn't participate in federal or state unemployment programs, right? So we suggest that you give your new employees a simple form that states that and asks them to sign an acknowledgement when they are hired. Keep that in their employee files. So we don't participate in unemployment insurance, but we do pay for workman's compensation insurance. Well, you probably know this, but just in case, if any of your paid staff is injured in any way while they are on the job, workman's comp will pay their medical expenses so that your church's liability insurance or their own medical insurance does not have to. This is a requirement by law, so be sure to sign up for and report and pay for workman's comp. Well, we're on to Chapter 3, insurance. And we're going to start with what's been really the most confusing topic over the last 2 years in all of America, and that is health insurance. It's the most fun of all, though. The Affordable Care Act has created a very complex torrent of new regulations regarding health insurance for the staff at your church. Since 2013, the rules seem to be changing every few months. So let me tell you that this information is current to the best of our and our lawyers' knowledge as of March of 2015. So here we go, at least for the time being. First of all, if you have only one employee at your church, then this is really simple. Nothing has changed from the good old days. You can pay your pastor's health insurance premium. You can pay it in pre-tax dollars. You can pay it whether he's on a group plan or an individual plan. That's it. But if you have more than one employee in your church, even if it's just one other person who only works 4 hours per week, if the church pays more than one person, then you're subject to very complex laws. I'll try my best to keep this as simple as possible here, but well, if you need more help, you're always welcome to call me. The best possible way to provide health care coverage for your employees, if you have more than one particularly, is to find a qualified group health plan that conforms to the plethora of regulations associated with the Affordable Care Act. Group coverage can be obtained through the Small Business Health Options Program, or SHOP marketplace, or through a private insurer. Now, while this option may be too cost prohibitive for some organizations, it also comes with some genuine tax advantages for employers and employees. Additionally, employers may be entitled to a health care tax credit to offset the cost of providing group coverage if certain conditions are met. Now, if you can't, by the way, you think we don't pay taxes, we're a church. The taxes that can be covered here are taxes on your income taxes for your staff, things that you would report on your 941. So there is a way that you can literally get a tax credit, even though you're a church, for doing a group plan. Now, if you can't offer group coverage, then, and this is important, you really can't reimburse your employees for anything associated with health insurance unless you have just one person on the plan. You can't pay their premiums for them. You can't reimburse them for those premiums or even a part of them. You can't create an FSA or an HSA. You can't just pay them back for out-of-pocket costs. You can't pay them or reimburse them for anything related to medical expenses. Doing so could make your church responsible for fines, cleverly, by the way, called excise taxes by the Internal Revenue Service. Those fines are $100 per person per day for every month that you're doing it. So don't do it. Instead, give your pastor and your employees a raise. Increase their salary by an amount slightly more than what you would otherwise pay on their behalf for health insurance. We encourage churches to also gross that amount up by the cost of the taxes that your employees will have to pay for that raise. It is, after all, taxable income. And because it's just income and not a reimbursement, they pay taxes. You cannot tie that raise, by the way, to the employee using it for health insurance coverage. What they do with that is up to them. Your job is just to give them that raise, which would allow them to go out and find insurance on their own, or to invest that money in a pickle factory or whatever they decide they want to do with it. Life insurance, disability insurance, and certain limited scope dental and vision benefits are not subject to taxes or fines, by the way. So your church can provide any of those tax-free to your pastors, and you can pay for them directly or reimburse your pastors for those costs without any penalties or fines to your church. Now, before I go on to liability and casualty insurance, let me just add this. This whole health insurance matter is extremely complex. You may have more than one employee in your church, but if you only have one employee who works fewer than 25 hours per week, it is possible that you can offer them a single person benefit plan, but that gets very tricky. There are a lot of rules about it, and so if you're there, feel free to call my office and we'll be happy to help you with it. It's larry.roberts@fmcusa.org if you want to send me an email, or you're welcome to call the numbers on your screen there. Now let's talk about liability and casualty insurance. The Free Methodist Church requires that every church have this kind of insurance. If you own a building, obviously you need to insure it. And with that, fire and casualty insurance is going to automatically come liability coverage. We urge you to make that liability coverage as much as you can afford. And if you don't have fire and casualty insurance, if you don't own the building, for instance, then even with renter's insurance or even without that, make sure you have liability insurance. And for obvious reasons, we insist that you carry that. We also insist that you list your conference as an additional insured on your policy. And we ask that you also list the Free Methodist Church USA as an additional insured, or a certificate holder, as some policies call it. This will cost you nothing extra, and it will make sure that the larger church is protected in the event that somebody sues your church, and hoping to get more money, they decide to also sue the conference and the denomination for something that happened at your church. Now, many of our conferences have group contracts with a specific insurance company. These could provide extra benefits to your church at no extra cost to you. So when you're looking for insurance, or just making sure that your current policy gives you the most coverage for the dollar, I'd make that first call not to an insurance carrier, not to a broker, but to the conference office and see what deals they have out there. And before you sign a new policy, be sure to check to see if it is occurrence-based or claims-based. Claims-based policies will protect you whenever somebody files a claim against your church during the dates when you're insured by that company. Occurrence-based policies, on the other hand, will protect you based upon whatever date that nasty event occurred. In 2014, one of our churches was sued for an event that occurred back in 2008. They had since changed insurance companies between 2008 and 2014. Their current insurer did not cover them. Another of our churches recently caught fire and was completely destroyed. For whatever reason, that church had violated our denomination's requirement and they had no insurance whatsoever. This was a smaller, older building, but now they were not only left without any place to meet, but they were facing the city's requirement of either tearing down or repairing the structure, and they had no money with which to do that. So please be sure that your church has both fire and casualty and liability insurance. We also strongly urge you to buy D&O, or directors and officers coverage. This will protect your pastor, yourself as church treasurer. It'll protect your official board in the event that somebody sues the church and then they decide to go after you personally. Not a happy thing. Be sure and get D&O insurance. On to Chapter 4. It's a short one. It's about taxes and receipts. Let me first of all remind you, at least briefly, about love offerings. If you have a guest speaker who comes to your church and you take a love offering for that person, don't forget that what you give the speaker is taxable income. If it's $600 or more in any calendar year, you are required to file a Form 1099 with the IRS. So be sure to get the Social Security number and address of any guest speaker you have who might receive more than $600. Now, about writing receipts. Be sure that the receipt that you give donors for the regular tithes and offerings at the end of the year contains these words: "No goods or services were received by the donor in exchange for this donation." It's critically important. You have to have those words, or it is not a receipt acceptable by the IRS. The IRS will not allow your donor to take the gift as a tax deduction, and you'll get your donors in trouble. So include those words in your receipts. Now, if somebody gives you goods, that is stuff, instead of money, you can give them a receipt for that, but it has to be a different receipt from what you would give to somebody who's made a cash donation. This is a kind of receipt that you get when you go to like the Goodwill store. You know, it says essentially, this will acknowledge the receipt of fill in the blank. The value of this donation is to be determined by the donor. The church makes no estimate as to its value. So that keeps you out of trouble, and yet it lets them decide how much this was worth, and they can claim it on their taxes. If somebody gives you an automobile, by the way, there is a special separate form for just that gift that you are required to fill out. There are additional requirements relating to those, so get details at www.irs.gov. And now finally, and this is the most important thing I can tell you about when it comes to receipt, never give a receipt for services. I can't tell you the number of times when I've been speaking at a gathering of churches, and this is something that happens all the time, and it really can get you in trouble. I will explain by telling you the true story of 72-year-old Sarah Kreider, the volunteer bookkeeper for a church that needed significant electrical work. Patrick Martin was the owner of M&G Electric, and he submitted a bid of $46,000 to do that work. The church accepted that bid and hired M&G to do the work. The church paid in advance $26,000 for the work. M&G did a great job. When the work was complete, Patrick Martin told Sarah, the bookkeeper, that the church didn't need to pay the remaining $20,000 if they'd just give M&G a tax receipt for the other 20 grand. Well, Sarah, who worked, by the way, for free for the church, praised God and promptly issued a receipt for $20,000, which M&G used as a deduction on their taxes. Unfortunately, some months later, M&G Electric got audited by the Internal Revenue Service, which claimed that that $20,000 gift receipt didn't have any proof. There was no proof that they'd given any money to the church. Now, if this had been done right, he'd have asked the church to pay him the remaining $20,000, and then he'd have turned around and written a check, a donation to the church. Then he would have had a legitimate tax deduction, but it didn't work that way. It's very sad because he was really trying to do a good thing here, and the church was just grateful for it. But unfortunately, Mr. Martin went to jail, and unfortunately, so did Sarah Kreider. Please, as a church treasurer, remember Sarah. Only write receipts for cash or checks or credit cards or online giving. Never write a receipt for services. Welcome to Chapter 5. This is our shortest chapter, and yet you get the same college credit for this chapter as all the other chapters, which is none. There is no college credit for any of these. So let's just get on with it, okay? Buying, mortgaging, or selling property. As is true of all church denominations, any buildings of the local church are owned by the local church, but they are held in trust for the denomination. This for a number of reasons, but primarily because of financial integrity. You know, a church building is not owned by any one person, or in many cases, even by one generation. Over many years, people give to the church, and with that money, the church may acquire property. Literally thousands of people over decades contribute to the property of the local church. Now, of course, we hope that all those churches will grow and exist forever. But with the migration of people and changing neighborhoods over the decades, some churches ultimately decline to the point that they're no longer viable. One of the wonderful things about a denomination is that when that happens, the last 15 people who are left at the church don't just decide, hey, let's close the church, sell the building, and give the money to my brother-in-law here. This person will just be fine. Because the property is held in trust for the Free Methodist Church, what happens is that the property is sold and the proceeds go to the local conference, which then invests them in future ministry. To accomplish this, all property has a trust clause in the deed, and that simply guarantees that the property will revert to the larger church should the local church close. So, whenever a local church buys property, that specific language must be included in the deed. And whenever the local church goes to sell that property or to mortgage it, well, it needs to get a release from the national church. That comes from my office. So if you are ever wanting to buy or mortgage or sell your church property, just contact, you could contact me, larry.roberts@fmcusa.org, and we'll be happy to provide you the legal paperwork that's necessary for you to do that. Welcome to Chapter 6. This is our last chapter. In this one, you finally find out who gets the girl and whether the bad guys go to jail. Well, no, actually, this is just on the relationship between the church and its conference and the Free Methodist Church USA. Hey, I don't need to tell you that tithing is one of God's commands. I mean, from the beginning, the New Testament church took collections and passed them on to the elders in Jerusalem and to missionaries like Paul and to other churches. In the same way today, local Free Methodist churches tie the percentage of their income to their conference, the conference in which they reside. And some of that money then is sent on to the national church. That amount that's passed along to the conference depends on which conference it is. The average across the United States is about 10%. A few, though, are a little more, a few are a little less. Out of that figure, 3.2% of a local church's revenue goes to the Free Methodist Church USA in what's called an EPP, or a part of our Equal Participation Plan. At the national level, that money pays for ministerial credentialing, so that local churches can know that their pastors are people of integrity and appropriately trained and in theological harmony with our beliefs. And ministerial training, which includes scholarships to seminaries for future pastors, financial aid to new church plants, communications, curriculum, paying for the Light and Life magazine that comes free to every person in our churches every month. It also pays for our websites and our newsletters, our yearbook, and some of the back office expenses that are associated with missions, with our pension plan, and the administrative functions of a church with over 1 million members worldwide. Coordinating and gathering of our conference superintendents and missions and area directors and national leadership groups like the African Heritage and Latin Networks, those costs are also included in that 3.2%. So you send in your what's called an assessment every month to your conference. Let's say it's 10%. And the conference then goes ahead and forwards a portion of that, equal to 3.2% of your offerings, onto the national church. That 3.2 is separate from the monthly payments that your church makes for the pension program. Now, once each year, generally in January and early February, we ask everybody to go online and fill out the annual report for your church. This involves statistics from the prior year's life of your church. Things like your average attendance, your number of members, how many people gave their lives to Jesus, and how many were baptized. That report also includes a financial report of your total giving, plus designated giving to things like missions, church planting, and so forth. Well, hopefully you learned something here, and hopefully your eyes are not crossed. One of the values of being a part of a denomination is that you're not alone out there. Somebody's got your back, and we are truly here to help. So please don't hesitate to contact us, any of us here at the World Ministry Center. We're located in Indianapolis, Indiana. My email is larry.roberts@fmcusa.org. And our phone number here at the World Ministry Center is 800-342-5531. And several of our conferences have helpful guides for churches. One of those, by the way, is from the North Central Conference. They've put together a really thorough and helpful guide, which they've graciously allowed us to make available to you. If you would like it, just email or call. We'll be happy to forward it to you. On behalf of the Board of Bishops of the Free Methodist Church, of the nearly 50 people who work at the World Ministry Center, and the more than 1 million Free Methodists around the globe, thank you. Thank you for being a hero of the church and serving as the treasurer of your local church. You are truly on the front lines, and your work is deeply appreciated. So, thanks. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you, and may He be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you His peace. Amen.